Fancy.
All right, let's get started. Another episode, two in 2 days. So, yeah. Anyway, we're back. Welcome. Today we'll explore Application Gateway for Containers together with Jack Stromberg, or Stromberg, depends on, your pronunciation. Jack, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So yeah, I mean, I got a message from Robin about 6 weeks ago, and he was like, "I've just watched Jack do this presentation. Can you try and get him on the show, right? Can you message him? Because he said it was one of the best things he's seen throughout the year, right? So I can't wait to see what this is about, right? For Application Gateway for Containers. But I just want to park that for a second, and we've got Christina on as well, right? So we had Jonah on yesterday, and we've got another team member, right, join the Streaming Cloud squad. So round of applause, please, for Christina Robin.
There we go.
Oh my God, this made my day. Don't get that every day.
When you wake up, just like a round of applause.
I just need to turn on this episode every morning, like the first minute of it. Thank you.
Awesome. But yeah, we're happy to have Christina on. She's obviously known for her amazing marketing skills, may I add, and her Kubernetes knowledge, right? So yeah, happy to have you here, Christina.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Kev.
Awesome. So should we get this started? Jack, tell us a little bit about Application Gateway for Containers.
For sure. So just to kick things off first, thanks for having me on the show. My name is Jack Stromberg. I'm one of the product managers for both Application Gateway and Application Gateway for Containers. So we released Application Gateway for Containers earlier this summer, I guess North America summer. And we're really excited to share the differences and the strategy behind how Application Gateway for Containers came to be. So maybe to kind of kick things off, let's do a little bit of a kind of blast from the past of where we are today. And so just to make sure you guys can see my screen, right?
Now we can. Just added it. Yeah. Good to check. Ready to go.
Good. So let's talk about current state today. So the discussion itself is around application load balancing for Kubernetes workloads. When I say application load balancing, this is distributing traffic at scale and taking advantage of things like session affinity, URL rewriting, custom health probes. These are things that you can't do to a certain extent at layer 4. When we want to actually terminate the connection, do inspection on what the contents are of that payload, and then proxy that onto whatever the backend target is going to be. That's really what we're talking about when we jump into the layer 7 realm. And so one of the longest running services on Azure is Application Gateway. I don't know if everybody remembers the service manager days, but Application Gateway made it into that time period. So Application Gateway, when it very first started, was really designed for load balancing layer 7 infrastructure workloads. What I mean by that is Application Gateway targeted virtual machines. When virtual machine scale sets came about, we started to load balance that. We are able to load balance to just any arbitrary IP address or FQDN. So if you need to distribute traffic both in Azure and back to on-premises, right, this load balancing solution is perfect for those types of scenarios. And then we added web application firewall to the solution as well. So protecting against SQL injections, cross-site scripting, etc. But then as Kubernetes started to come around, we had to find another solution to orchestrate the changes that are happening within inside of Kubernetes to Application Gateway. One of the big benefits around utilizing like a first-party solution for load balancing with Kubernetes is it sits outside of the clusters. So any of the compute that's really being done for proxying that traffic, TLS termination, handling the WAF rules, handling the URL rewrites or header rewrites, all of that compute is offloaded from your cluster. We are able to proxy that traffic straight into the pods, so you have good performance on both aspects. Similarly, because it is first party, right, you get some of the benefits of having a consistent experience for metrics, alerting, monitoring, and so forth. It's part of the Azure ecosystem. And so, yeah, certainly you can go out, you can use like Nginx and Envoy and HA proxy, whatever it may be. But if you're really looking for something that's just, managed, you don't have to worry about it. Like, I don't know if everybody saw, but a week or two back, maybe it's a little bit even older than that, there was the industry-wide vulnerability of HTTP2. That was something that the service protected from like the second that was announced, right? That's not something that you have to go and worry about. So there's always, some questions about like, do I roll this myself or do I use a first-party solution? It's really why Application Gateway came about. It's something that you have some peace of mind in using like the managed solution. But not to get into the sales side here, after Kubernetes was introduced, right, we introduced Application Gateway Ingress Controller to handle translating ingress configuration inside of Kubernetes to essentially be an Azure Resource Manager call to configure Application Gateway. And so as you define a host in Ingress, that gets translated to a listener in Application Gateway. And so the controller was super lightweight, just as a middleman to do those translations. The problem that we found, though, is as these Kubernetes workloads are really pushing massive scale, and we're constantly scaling out or scaling in the number of pods that we have. The tricky part is when we make a call out to Azure Resource Manager, there are a series of different steps in how that request is processed. We go through the Azure Resource Manager layer. For all Azure resources, there are what are called resource providers. And so we go through the Microsoft.Network resource provider, and we go through another control plane. And then ultimately, right, we get down to the data plane where the actual load balancing happens. And so those steps, that can add some time to the request. And so a lot of feedback that we've seen in GitHub and some of the cases that have come up is, hey, I received like 502 HTTP status codes for my backend targets. What's going on? And typically what's happening is Kubernetes is deleting or removing that pod before Application Gateway had a chance to process the request and then update its backend, right? And so if you read through the documentation, there's one step in there that talks about adding like just a quick sleep timer just to give the gateway some time to update its backend target so that you don't run into the scenario where the load balancer is trying to push traffic to an endpoint that no longer exists. Similarly, when the Ingress controller was introduced, we added a series of annotations. There's an annotation for almost everything, right? You have an annotation for defining your health probes, for doing SSL offloading and so forth, right? So it can kind of be a little bit complex. And so when we look at Application Gateway for containers, we went back to the drawing board. And even though the word Application Gateway is in the product name, we've really designed both the control plane and the data plane from the ground up. We want something that's a great native experience for Kubernetes. And so although Application Gateway is in the name, it's part of our Application Gateway family. This is essentially net new. It is not utilizing the Application Gateway that you know and have used today. This is essentially net new, really designed first party for having a great experience with Kubernetes. And so when we take a look at how Application Gateway for containers, I'll just abbreviate that as AGC in this discussion, works versus AGIC, the underlying design looks very similar. Like this design looks almost identical to App Gateway Ingress Controller. The only difference, though, is the AGC resource or service offers this new control plane. And this control plane, we've really invested in making sure that it scales out quickly and it's extremely performant when it receives update calls. And so you'll notice we still have a controller that runs inside of your Kubernetes cluster. But when you make a change in Ingress, for example, that change no longer goes out to Azure Resource Manager and through our network resource provider. We have a direct communication channel to our control plane, and this results in extremely quick convergence times for your configuration updates. And so if I add a new host in Ingress, we typically see those requests happen near real time. A lot of times those requests are happening seconds or less. This is orders of magnitude quicker than what we saw in the AGIC world. Similarly, the number of pods and the number of listeners and the number of rules that you're familiar with in AGIC, a lot of those limits have been increased in AGC as well. We can support much larger scale. So the underlying design of this service is really quite a bit more flexible and really tailored towards making sure that your Kubernetes experience is what you would expect. Now, when we look at the AGC service itself, there's a couple of new concepts that we've introduced. There are 3 different resources that we introduced into Azure Resource Manager. The first one is the AGC parent resource. So we call this the Application Gateway for Containers resource. This is the control plane that's going to listen for all the configuration updates that are happening inside of your Kubernetes environment. It's receiving those requests from the controller. Then we introduced the concept of a front end. A front end is the endpoint that's exposed for your clients to connect to. Today, the limit in public preview, I should have mentioned right now, we are in public preview, is 5. And we've heard a lot of feedback from customers saying 5, that's not super great. I need to host way more than 5 sites. I want to stress that a front end is not designed to map to one-to-one to a host name. So for example, if I'm hosting contoso.com and fabricam.com, I would not have 2 front ends. I could still have a single front end, and I can put both of those hosts on that same front end. We'll talk about why the front ends, or why we allow multiple front ends in a little bit. But I do want to stress that a front end is a unique endpoint to receive connections from clients. It is not the identifier that's mapped to the hosts or services that you're hosting with inside of Kubernetes per se. And then the last resource that we have in Resource Manager is the concept of an association. This is where we inject or connect to your private network and allow the traffic to be proxied to your Kubernetes cluster. So very similar to Application Gateway, you will have a subnet that's dedicated for this service. That's where we inject and then connect into your network to be able to proxy that traffic forward. So I don't know if I'm supposed to ask if there's any questions so far, but I'll kind of take a second and pause and see if any of you guys have some questions here.
Not from my side. Audience seems to be pretty quiet as well. So guys, if anyone has any questions, please let us know. Kev, Chris?
Yeah, throw a thumbs up or a star in the chat or something to show that you're here.
Yeah, just a general comment. I don't know where it would suit throughout this session, but in general, I think when I first saw Application Gateway for Containers being released in public preview, I think I was really happy to see that, because there have been a lot of discussions about the desire of having the service that was more native to containerized workloads and to Kubernetes. And this kind of is what the feeling we get from the Application Gateway for Containers, which I guess was lacking with AGIC. So this is cool so far.
All right, perfect. So
I do have one question now that pops up.
Yeah.
Is the web application firewall included as well, or can you enable that as an add-on? Or
Yeah, great question. So as part of public preview right now, we do not have the web application firewall component, but I can confirm that will be coming to this solution. It has not been forgotten about. That's something that's actively in development. So I'll have more to share later on, but yes, we will be bringing WAF support to this solution. Similar to Application Gateway or Azure Front Door, the WAF team has what's called WAF policy. And inside of that, you can configure your custom rules, your rate limiting, and so forth. So what you kind of know and are familiar with today will come to AGC as well.
So just to emphasize, you've built this from the ground up, right? So it's not an app gateway, right, with WAF enabled. It's a brand new resource and SKU, right? So it's more integrated into the Kubernetes, the AKS ecosystem, right?
That's correct. Yep. Like I said, the underlying control plane and data plane that is used to power Application Gateway today is different in this solution. So like I said, we went back to the drawing board. We took all the feedback in GitHub. I know a lot of folks have said, hey, what's going on with AGIC? Is this still supported? It is supported. But we've spent a lot of time investing and taking a lot of the comments that have been raised either in GitHub issues or feedback to really make sure that this is the first class experience that you would expect.
awesome. Jeff had the same question, but we already addressed this one. So
Yep, coming soon.
awesome.
Cool. So let's maybe talk about some of the other differences. Just from an infrastructure perspective, we did talk about some differences, but what does that really mean to me, right? So I did kind of throw together 3 different slides here that kind of compare and contrast where we are from AGIC versus AGC. So, the biggest value add in this service, right, is the performance is significantly improved over AGIC. This was designed for a great Kubernetes experience. One of the highly requested features in GitHub was, hey, if I'm hosting my controller and it's on a node that goes down for updates or for whatever it may be, I need to make sure that I don't lose those load balancing updates. We recently introduced high availability for the controller. So now we run that active passive on 2 different nodes to make sure that we're always updating the load balancing configuration. Similarly, because we've updated the data plane, we are introducing some new functionality that's been requested. We support mutual authentication to the backend. Right now in public preview, we do not support mutual authentication to the front end, which is what AGIC offers, but that will be coming. There are some AGIC feature parity items that we are absolutely working on, so you'll see those light up as we get closer towards general availability. Another huge, highly requested feature that's been in AGIC and App Gateway in general for quite some time is, how do I do blue-green deployments? How do I introduce a new version of my service and just put maybe 5% of traffic on there, see how it goes, and then continue to scale that out? That is fully supported right now in the public preview as well. So you can do weighted round robin instead of just round robin across all the pods. We also support some improved routing capabilities. If I want to route requests based on a header value or query string, that's pretty tricky to do in App Gateway and AGIC. So we do have a native experience for that now. So that opens up a lot of capabilities just in terms of how you want to direct traffic to different services and backends. Monitoring and alerting, we did introduce some new metrics. I'll show you that in the portal in a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about text-based log formatting. That's kind of tucked away in our documentation right now, but we do have some exciting things coming forward with that. And then a lot of the bigger changes are really just around the experience in Kubernetes, what you would expect to manage a solution just solely within Kubernetes. If I'm a Kubernetes administrator and I want to deploy this, and I have no Azure knowledge, we want that to be a great experience, whether you're an app developer or an Azure administrator. It should be seamless and transparent, whether, regardless of what my persona is. So that kind of starts with, what is the experience? How do I actually configure this thing inside of Kubernetes? And like I said, we had a ton of annotations back in AGIC. We've finally refactored that and moved it all into custom resources. This is one nice consolidated area now, where it makes much more sense just to define this all in one go, reference it to your service, and yeah, away you go. So you can kind of see the collapsing of all those annotations in this case. These are two different examples moving from Ingress annotations to its equivalent in AGC. One thing that I do want to bubble up is we do know that there are a ton of customers that have, built out their Ingress definitions in AGIC. Don't worry, we are working on a migration path for you. This will help translate those existing annotations to these custom resources for you. That way you don't have to go and rewrite all of your YAML specs. So we'll have more to share around migration strategies and roadmap as we get closer towards general availability as well. So stay tuned on that front. Now, one of the bigger items is around Gateway API. So Gateway API is pretty new to Kubernetes. I guess it has been around for quite some time now, but for those that aren't familiar with it, essentially it's taken a lot of the learnings from Ingress and will be the next evolution to Ingress. And so this is introduced with inside of the Kubernetes community. And you can notice, if we kind of ignore the picture on the left and we look solely at the right side, let's take the scenario of wanting to do URL rewriting, right? In the case of Ingress, that may require several annotations. It might require a custom resource. In Gateway API, they've introduced a filter, and all of this is native to the Gateway resource. I don't have to go out and have a different experience from controller A to controller B. This is something that's portable, and it's a familiar experience regardless of what the load balancing solution is. So we've really tried to embrace what the Kubernetes community has offered and take advantage of it out of the box. So much cleaner way to define your load balancing rules without going out and defining those annotations or those custom resources. So yeah, some really cool improvements there just around experience. Now on the left side, kind of more importantly, is we've heard a lot of feedback in the GitHub repo about, I have two different teams. They're using the same application gateway. If team A defines an Ingress configuration and it has a typo in it, it stops configuration updates. And now any load balancing change that's happening does not converge against the gateway or the load balancer. And so Gateway API really enables a lot of flexibility when we look at doing roles and permissions within inside of the organization. The gateway itself is really nice because I can define what ports I'm listening on, but then I can have different HTTP routes, different namespaces delegated to different teams to have my application owners define what they want to do within their load balancing rules, but not affect the other teams that are also working on that same gateway, for example. So there's a lot of flexibility when we look at cross namespace support that is greatly improved in AGC. And then there's also, again, a lot of flexibility around making sure that what team A defines versus team B defines does not cause impact. Now, one thing I do want to mention is I had talked about front ends a while back and said, a front end really isn't mapped to a host name. It's not mapped to contosa.com or fabricam.com. The cardinality of a front end resource in Resource Manager is one-to-one to a gateway or ingress resource in Kubernetes. And so what that means is if I want to have the gateway or the ingress resource in a different namespace to have those isolated even further, I can create a new gateway, and all of those routes underneath it are going to go to a front end that's unique from team B, who has a separate gateway or ingress resource and their load balancing rules. So technically, if both of those teams wanted to use contoso.com and pointed their host file directly to that front end, that's something that you could achieve without causing any conflict between those two teams. So you can get some really cool isolation scenarios when you're utilizing AGC over AGIC. So yeah, that's pretty much all that I have for slideware. We talked quite a bit about AGC at a high level, but let's see here. Does AGC support large message sizes?
Yeah, you
Hosting
got it
workloads
already.
over 10 minutes.
There we go.
Sorry, I got a little ahead of myself here.
No worries, no worries.
I'll follow up. I know for a fact that we haven't documented that limit quite yet. That's a great question. Let me follow up with you. I don't know what that limit is off top hand.
Can I also ask a few questions?
Absolutely.
So my first question is, like with AGIC, the recommendation has always been like the best practice is to have a single AGIC per cluster. Does this still stand for AGC as well? Is it the recommended scenario?
Yeah, great question. So we do recommend, or today the supported scenario is only to have one AGC controller. We call it the ALB controller into a Kubernetes cluster. This single controller is smart enough to be able to connect to multiple AGC resources. So you don't need to deploy multiple ALB controllers for that scenario. So again, if team A wants something totally separate, they want even their own data path, they can have AGC deployment A, and then the second team can have AGC deployment B. The scenario of the front ends, right? One of the benefits of the isolation is not only having the isolation, but reutilizing the data path. And so one area that's a little bit tricky is the underlying proxying itself is typically like when we're thinking about cost and pricing, that's where the bulk of your cost is going to come from. And so we wanted to make it flexible enough where you can still achieve isolation, but reuse the investment that you've made in your data plane. So even though you have separate front ends, you have separate gateway or ingress resources, the cool thing is we can have the same data path shared. That way you're reusing your investment at the data path level too. So there's many different configurations that you can do that are supported. Multi-cluster, so having two Kubernetes clusters in the same region and updating the same AGC resource, that isn't supported today. That's something that we're taking a look at longer term.
Makes sense. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
This is just a very interesting topic. I have one question that I'm curious about that is related to OAuth support, because I've been working a lot with the applications that, for instance, would require to have an OAuth 2 proxy, for instance, running on the side, because you don't want to expose an application running in the cluster publicly. So you would want to have something like a sidecar, for instance, to be able to do that before the request is proxied to the application. And this has also been a challenge with the Application Gateway in general, that this was not supported in the Application Gateway and therefore was not supported in AGIC. And therefore it has been a blocker for many to migrate, for instance, from Nginx Ingress Controller to AGIC because of that, because there are some challenges with implementing also open source projects like OAuth 2 proxy together with AGIC. So I'm curious if this is something you have discussed or thought about in terms of AGC, or maybe even tested with tools like OAuth 2 proxy, or if you can comment on any of that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have definitely heard the feedback, not only from you, but we've seen it in the GitHub issues that have been raised. We've heard it from customer discussions. It's not something that we support in AGC yet. It's certainly on our roadmap. It's a high priority item that we want to get done, but I don't have any additional details to kind of share at this time. But yes, we have heard the community. We 100% agree with the value in bringing that feature. So stay tuned. The voice is not lost. I really want to I know in the past our engagement in the community hasn't been what it should be, and so I'm really hoping to change that. But yes, I absolutely hear you. I agree with you guys. It's definitely something that we need to bring about. So I'll have more to share as we go, GA beyond.
Great. We'll stay tuned then. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's maybe kind of look at, let's see here, which window do I have open? Let's actually take a look at the technology. It's always great to talk about it, but
demo time, right?
Let's make sure it's not vaporware either.
Yeah.
So the first thing that you see when you open up the Azure portal, I'm really visual, so I like to use this as a kind of compare and contrast. Is if you search for Application Gateway, right, you see two different resources. Again, even though the name is there, these are two separate services. And so when I look at the Application Gateway for Containers resource, like I said, it's quite a bit different in the portal. There's no concept of rules. There's no concept of backend targets. There's no concept of listeners. All of those configurations are originating from your Kubernetes environment, and they go directly to our control plane. We are certainly taking a look at options to be able to bubble it up so you have a really quick way to see what your configuration is from Azure. But that is why you see a drastic difference in the portal experience. We really want that Kubernetes experience to resonate and to have that great experience within Kubernetes. So we kind of started from there first. When you take a look at metrics, we did redo the metrics. We tried to make them as actionable as possible. Let me see. Maybe I'm using this cluster. I don't remember which cluster I'm using. Oof, neither of them. Let's see here. Maybe this will have something. Okay, perfect. So when you look at metrics, the common thing that's overlooked is like, okay, great, I have 97,000 requests. Like, what does that mean to me? So make sure that you take a look at splits and filters. Splitting will allow you to take a look at different front ends. So like I said, you can have different front end resources. On this resource, I only have one, and it's listening on port 80. And then you can take a look at filters, which would add another dimension. And unfortunately for this resource, I don't have a ton of traffic going through here. Let's maybe take a look at a different metric. I don't think this is going to show. Let's see here. Should have sent a bunch of traffic to this before this demo today. But typically when you're doing splits, there's a couple of different dimensions that we added. One of them is on the HTTP response code. So if you want to take a look at which front end maybe is issuing 400 responses or 500 responses, you can easily do a quick split on that. Similarly, if you want to take one step further, it's like, great, I know that a certain front end has a specific status code, but like, how do I know which one of the services? I have 100 services behind it. Then you would add your filter, and the filter itself would go ahead and get you down to each individual service. And so the cool thing is the service within Kubernetes is bubbled up, and then you can really start to visualize like what my traffic patterns are through the metrics. As usual, live demos going awry. So you'll have to try it on your own. Let me know how it goes. But it is there.
It's cool.
I know it's there.
It's cool.
Diagnostic settings. This is brought over from all Azure services. In Application Gateway and Azure Front Door, we have the concept of access logs. Access logs contain your get, post, put, delete responses. So any requests that you're sending to the front end, source IP, destination IP, ports, etc. All of that is captured inside your access logs. So today you can dump that into storage accounts. We'll be bringing log analytics and Event Hub for general availability as well. So you'll be able to query and alert upon that as well. Now, one scenario that we did add for health monitoring that's pretty cool is if we take a look at backend health, in Application Gateway, we had the concept of backend health from the portal, and it would say, yeah, your backend targets are healthy or they're unhealthy. Because those resources don't live inside of Azure Resource Manager, we have another way that you can take a look at backend health with inside of Kubernetes. And so I had talked about our controller being highly available across 2 different nodes. When we actually take a look, I'm going to bounce around here really quick. That's pod. When we look at the controller that's running within inside of your cluster, it's comprised of 3 different pods. We have 2 of the controller pods, which are actually taking a look and monitoring the ingress and gateway resources. So this is doing the bulk of the work. And then you have the bootstrap pod, which is what we use to kind of bootstrap our custom resources and so forth. Now, as these controllers are kind of making those changes, there's actually another service that's exposed on the controller for backend health. And so if you send a curl request to those controller pods over port 8000, we have an API where you can take a look at which services it's distributing traffic to, whether or not there's healthy or unhealthy endpoints. And then you can take one step further and select your service itself and see the individual pods and the health of whether or not we're sending traffic to them or not. If it's not healthy, we're not going to send traffic to it. If it's healthy, it should be forwarding traffic to it. So it's a little bit neat because this is something, again, that you can do with inside the Kubernetes environment. The other piece that we're excited about, I don't know what just happened there. Hopefully I'm still connected. But we are emitting logs in text-based format. So what that means is if you want to integrate into your Prometheus deployments or use like Azure Grafana to be able to take a look at some of your metrics instead of what's provided by Azure out of the box, this is a new capability that was not offered in AGIC. So reutilizing a lot of the tools that you're probably familiar with today and being able to have that consistent experience. We don't have an end-to-end scenario documented quite yet, but stay tuned on that front. But we are pretty excited to offer something that's a bit more native to what folks are familiar with. Cool. So maybe another scenario that we can kind of get into is, I did talk about about the gateway resource itself. And like, for those that haven't seen this quite yet, let's take a look at what this means. Oh boy, is this not going to let me expand this? All right. So when we define a gateway resource in Kubernetes, there's a couple of pieces that we've kind of tailored towards the AGC experience. The first part is looking at the gateway resource itself. In this particular case, you'll notice that we introduce a type of an ALB front end. This is a reference to the front end resource of your AGC resource. We reference it by name. There was some feedback that was provided by Pixel Robots, and in one of his sessions a little bit earlier, one of his asks was, hey, can I have a front end created with inside of this environment, but pre-provision the ARM resources, for example? That is something that you can do in this experience. So if you want to reference something that's existing, you can go ahead, reference it by name. If you want it to be created, then remove this and we'll generate the front end for you. When that front end is generated, instead of having to go back to the Azure portal, we've added a status indicator to both gateway and ingress resources. So if you're trying to understand, hey, I just made a change to my gateway or my HTTP route, did that actually apply? You can quickly take a look at the status and see what's going on. So for this gateway resource, I know that there's 2 attached routes and that the listener change was recently accepted. And if I take a look at the HTTP routes, let's do this first. So I have 2 routes right now, one listening on Contosa.com, one on Fabricam. You'll notice that I have a similar experience here as well, and you can see that the route itself was successfully updated. So I can expect if I were to send traffic to that route on this gateway, it would be served. The status has shown that it's converged. And so for this scenario, this is really basic. This is what we would call our kind of multi-site hosting on AGC, right? I had Contosa.com and Fabricam.com. In this example, I'm just sending traffic to a service that echoes back a response. So I built the script here. So I built the script here, and all it does is it responds back like, hey, I'm running on this host, and this is the service that's fielding the request from the pod. And so if we take a look at like the time that it takes to update, let's see if we can do this here. Scale. Then you go to like 10 different replicas. Right, in AGIC,
The typo, double O.
Right. In AGIC, right, like that can take multiple seconds to happen. You can see that that change has already converged. It's already load balancing across those pods almost immediately. Our goal is to make that time just almost instant from what you configure inside of Kubernetes to what you have with inside of AGC. So even though it's an out of cluster resource, it should feel as if it's inside your cluster and converge as if it's inside your cluster. It's really what we're going for. So I know I've rambled for quite a bit. I want to save some time here for any other questions. That's kind of what I have for now, but any other questions or anything that you guys want to run through?
There is one more question from Jeff.
Will AGIC be used within the ML extension for AKS in the future? I don't, not for AGIC. One thing that I didn't mention about AGC is deployment. Today, AGC is deployed solely through Helm chart. And so you have to go about configuring your own identity and making sure that like the latest version is used on your controller and so forth. And so one item that we are working on, let me open this up here. App routing. Is AKS introduced an app routing add-on, and the app routing add-on, which is called web app routing add-on, is a way that we can enable deployment inside of AKS and have it managed by AKS. And so one thing that you will see, and this is the wrong one, this is the retired one. Here we go. So what you will see in the web app or app routing add-on is we'll be coming soon to this. As you update your cluster, we'll make sure that the latest version of the controller is deployed. You don't have to worry about building the identity. You don't have to worry about building the AGC resources. This is something that you can go add on to your cluster and away you go. In AGIC, we had our add-on. We're not planning on introducing an add-on separate to AGC. We want to reuse and have a consistent experience with what's in the AKS ecosystem. So that's something to kind of keep an eye out for in terms of investments of like what we're planning on extending to. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but yeah, not for AGIC. AGC, our plan is to integrate with app routing add-on instead.
Okay. It's pretty awesome, Jack. I like the fact that it's the rapid deployment, the rapid changes, right? That integration seems to be a key focus here, right, into the ecosystem. And we're bringing it to the Kubernetes ecosystem rather than trying to bring it to the Azure ecosystem, right? If that makes sense.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. Like there's been a lot of feedback. We've learned a lot from AGIC, so we're really excited to hear the feedback from the community on what they think about the AGC implementation. Sorry to sneak in one last item here. One question that has come up from customers is when you read through the documentation, you'll notice that we have two different deployment strategies. One thing that I do want to clarify is one deployment strategy is not better than the other one. When we were designing this, we thought of two different scenarios. We thought of the scenario where an organization has invested in maybe deploying all Azure resources through Terraform, for example. And so you deploy the ARM resources through Terraform, but then you reference those resources within inside of Kubernetes. We call that the bring your own deployment scenario. And that is one option that you can take. The other option is if you want the lifecycle to be solely managed within inside of Kubernetes. You don't want to go to the Azure portal. You don't want to manage those Azure resources. Then we have the managed by ALB controller experience. What that means is we've introduced a new custom resource called an application load balancer. The reason why we didn't call it AGC or Application Gateway is we were thinking about the like the app owner, and the app owner may not have experience with Azure itself, but they would know what an application load balancer is. That's something that's a unique industry term. And so if they define an application load balancer, that will create the AGC resources for them. And then the lifecycle will be managed with inside of Kubernetes. As I delete that resource, those resources get cleaned up in Azure. So again, depending on how your shop operates, bring your own might be the best way to go, or the managed scenario might be the best way to go. But there isn't one deployment strategy that's better than the other one. It totally depends on how the organization operates and what you prefer. It's preference.
Cool.
Awesome stuff. It's definitely appreciated. No, Jeff said great work and much needed improvements, and that seems to be, the trend basically. So, really great stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate the questions, Jeff. Great questions.
So, where would folks find it? Right, you mentioned this GitHub, right, where you're getting loads of feedback, right, as well. We've had lots of product managers on the show, and they've all said it's community engagement and feedback, right, to help shape the product. Where would we find it, right? Where is it?
Yeah, great question. So it sounds a little bit counterintuitive. So AGIC was an open source project. It's been hosted out on GitHub. Anybody can go and contribute to it. Given how the control plane design works, we unfortunately had to make the decision to close source the controller itself.
Right.
That being said, we do really want to stay active in the community. We really want the feedback in the community. There are a couple of different ways that you can get the feedback to us. The first one is feedback.azure.com. Mileage may vary depending on the product team that you're working with, but we are taking a look at the feedback that's publicly posted inside of feedback.azure.com. So if you push your feedback there, I promise you it will be looked at. It is not something that will be forgotten. The second thing too is typically we try not to push folks towards support cases for feature asks, but if it happened to go in there, it still will make its way up to us. Or the third thing is, like I said, I'm really trying to get more involved with the community. If you want to reach out directly to me, I'm cool with that too. Like I'll even give you my email address. If you look at my name that's written and you add a period, so jack.stromberg, and then you add at microsoft.com, yeah, shoot me a message. I'm happy to chat with you and see how we can improve, or if you have a question as you're deploying, like reach out. We're really happy to engage.
Great
All right.
stuff.
Yeah, I posted both the feedback.azure.com and your email address in the chat. So hopefully the bots don't find your email address. I was just thinking about like, oh, was this the best idea? But let's see. And otherwise, you can blame me, Jack.
No worries. Like I said, we really want the feedback. I think in the past, like there has been a stigma that we aren't involved in the community. I'm really hoping to change that, and we're really excited about introducing this to the AKS ecosystem.
And there's like a AKS community call as well, right? That's been revamped.
Yeah. We have been engaged in certain facets on that as well. There's a lot of internal syncs that also happen that we've been engaged in. So wherever we can plug in, we're happy to sync up with anyone.
Yeah, that's actually a really great forum. I've been on a few sessions. I don't think there was one for AGC just yet, from what I've seen, but maybe we get to see it in one of the upcoming community calls.
Yeah. The other thing too is if you are trying to stay up to date with what we do have going on, tucked away in our references section in our docs, we are publishing a ongoing change log of what is being introduced. So this is one item to keep an eye out on. We recently, at the end of September, released a ton of parity changes for Ingress. Typically right now we're releasing changes to Gateway API and then we're backporting them down into Ingress. But again, our goal is to bring feature parity to Ingress to allow those that have made the investment in AGIC to move over. One thing I do want to stress is AGIC is not deprecated. You are totally supported using AGIC. If you open up a case, we'll certainly help you out. But long-term, like this is kind of the direction that we're moving in. So I'm not announcing deprecation of AGIC by any means. Overlay, I'm surprised that didn't come up as a question. Overlay support is something that we are absolutely taking a look at. It is something that we will bring both to AGIC and AGC. So that is something that will come to both solutions for parity as well. But long term, yep, we are excited about the direction that and the capabilities that we can build upon this.
While we are on this topic, Jack, one question I didn't get to ask, but since you brought this up, I kind of feel like I could sneak that one in, like regarding migrating from AGIC to AGC. I don't think there is like any information out yet in the documentation. Is there anything like specific that you know that people, the community should be aware of, or is it straightforward?
Yeah, great question. So right now, we don't have any documentation published for migrating from AGIC to AGC. Like I had mentioned, we moved from annotations to a custom resource. So it's kind of, unfortunately, on the customer or the administrator using this feature to make those translations. We are working on tooling to help facilitate the migration of those annotations to the custom resource. So that's something that I'll have more to share with as we get closer towards general availability. So don't worry on that front. The one thing that I would say is if you are new to this service, or if you're just getting started and deploying your first workload, I would strongly recommend moving to Gateway API. You'll see more of the complex features over time move towards Gateway API as it's much more flexible and extensible. So for new workloads, definitely go check out Gateway API. That'll put you in a really good long-term position, not only for AGC, but just inside of Kubernetes itself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jack.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I just want to say, Jack, I always find it, I always love it when a PM comes on and owns it. Like really knows, right, technically what's going on with their product, right, and their solution, right? And I know it's, it's your role and everything else, but there's loads of stuff there, right? And I can see the possibilities of it. I think it's gonna be great, right, for the community out there, right? I can see this really fixing a hole that we've got.
Absolutely. I really appreciate the opportunity to come out and share with what we've been working on. I really want to give a shout out to our devs. They're the ones that make this possible. They usually don't get a ton of a ton of recognition. And so if they do check this out, I do want to give them a shout out. They're really the ones that make this possible. So for any of the developers out there, just shout out. This is what makes my job easy, right? As a PM, is we've really got a pretty exciting foundation that we've built upon, and we're really excited to share more with you guys over the coming months ahead.
Awesome. Robin, Chris, anything else to add?
I'm thinking about when is this going GA? Is that already announced?
That's you know, that's
No
all
pressure.
I ever get asked about everything. Jack, any predictions or rough timelines or anything on that?
I don't have a specific date I can share with you. I can say soon. This isn't something that we're planning on having in public preview indefinitely, or even this time next year. So we're getting there. I'll have more to share soon.
Awesome.
This is what we like to hear.
So follow Jack on wherever he is, right? LinkedIn, Twitter, right? To get those updates, right? And maybe some tantalizing previews or whatever, right? Of what's coming up next.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's us. Just want to say thank you to Jack, and also thank you to the devs that make it all happen, right? In the back end. And we'll catch you on the next one.
Absolutely. Right. So thanks for joining, Jack. We would love to have you back once it's GA and you have a lot of other amazing stuff to share with us. I'm really excited about this, and everyone that is, busy with Kubernetes is really excited about this as well. So yeah, Chris, any final words?
Yeah, super excited for this as the one working with Kubernetes, and this is great walkthrough, Jack. So thanks a lot. I think we could see if that community appreciates what's going on here with AGIC and where this is going. So really excited for all the upcoming news in the near future as well. So thank you so much, and thanks to all the devs. This is for making this happen.
Yep. Likewise, like I said, definitely reach out. We want the feedback, and really appreciate you all for having me on for this session.
Awesome. All right. With that, time to wrap up. Thank you again. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Don't be a stranger.
See you.